미국에 대한 테러 공격은 새로운 글로벌 경제의 위험성과 관련해 많은 질문들을 야기했다. 테러리즘은 과연 세계화의 어두운 얼굴인가?
Up until September 11th, there was a sense that this movement towards globalization really was irreversible. And since then, there's a recognition that things can go in another direction.
서로 긴밀히 연결된 오늘날의 세계는 모두에게 번영을 가져다 줄 것인가?
That's basically the next big challenge is making this interdependent world of ours on balance far more positive and negative. And the extent to which we succeed in doing that will determine whether the 21st century is either marred by terrorism of all kinds or whether it becomes the most peaceful and prosperous and interesting time the world's ever known.
이것은 글로벌 경제의 탄생 배경, 즉 정부와 시장이 세계 경제의 패권을 놓고 벌인 100년 동안의 싸움에 관한 얘기다. (1990년대) 많은 나라에서 진행된 자본주의 혁명으로 역사상 가장 큰 규모의 국제무역이 가능해졌다. 새로운 세계화 시대가 열린 것이다.
Millions of people a day are better off than they would have been without globalization, and very few people have been harmed by it.
하지만 이러한 장밋빛 전망과 함께 한편에서는 세계화의 충격에 대한 격렬한 논쟁도 벌어졌다.
Should the world's wealthiest people really dictate how the world's economy is going to run?
누가 글로벌 경제 시대에 새로운 게임의 규칙을 만들 것인가를 둘러싼 싸움은 이제 시작되고 있다.
지난 30년 가까이 지구촌 경제를 휩쓸어온 화두는 세계화입니다. 세계화란 국가 간의 사람, 자본, 상품 그리고 정보의 이동에 아무런 규제가 없는 상태를 의미합니다. 이와 같은 세계화는 신자유주의를 이론적 토대로 하여 재등장하게 되었는데 일본, 한국, 독일과 같은 제조 중심 국가들은 수출이 크게 늘어 세계화의 혜택을 본 것도 사실입니다. 반면 미국, 영국과 같은 나라들은 자신들이 강점을 가진 금융산업을 무기로 세계화에 나섰습니다. 그들의 금융자본은 아무런 제한 없이 전 세계를 돌아다니면서 막대한 수익을 거둬들였습니다. 금융자본주의라는 말도 이와 같은 배경에서 생겨났습니다. 그러나 문제는 이와 같은 금융자본주의가 전 세계적인 금융위기를 초래할 수 있다는 사실을 아무도 예측하지 못했다는 것입니다. 1997년에 우리가 겪은 외환위기나 최근의 글로벌 금융위기는 금융의 세계화가 가져올 수 있는 위험성을 우리 모두가 간과한 결과가 아닌가 생각됩니다.
Out of the sorrow of September 11th, I see opportunity. A chance for nations to strengthen and rethink and reinvigorate their relationships. When nations open their markets to the world, they find in America a trading partner, an investor, and a friend.
우리는 지금 혁명을 경험하고 있다. 1990년대 우리는 새로운 형태의 글로벌 경제의 탄생을 목격했다. 모든 사람에게 영향을 미치지만 그 누구도 통제권을 갖지 못한 단일 시장이 생겨난 것이다. 세계화는 전례없는 풍요를 가져왔다. 그와 함께 사람들이 지금껏 경험하지 못한 새로운 위기와 위험도 생겨났다. 세계화가 시작되면서 전 세계에 걸쳐 부와 빈곤 그리고 이 시대의 새로운 게임의 규칙에 대한 논쟁이 벌어졌다.
Historians may well say that a new era began at the beginning of the 1990s with the end of the Cold War and the Gulf crisis. And that was this new era of globalization, of a world being tied together by flows of investment, of trade, of ideas, of culture, of people traveling all the time. And it happened very fast, and it so often happened. The change came more quickly than the ability of thinking to catch up and understand the change. But to understand where we are today and where we're going, we have to understand this recent past.
세계화에 가장 큰 영향을 미친 것은 자유롭고 개방된 시장에 대한 믿음이었다. 자유무역은 200년 이상 자본주의 사상의 토대를 이루고 있었다. 하지만 1990년대 글로벌 시장에서 자유무역은 단순한 사상을 넘어 누구도 무시할 수 없는 현실이 되었다. 이 얘기는 빠른 속도로 변화하는 세계 경제 속에서도 미국만은 표류하는 것처럼 보였던 1992년에 시작된다. 당시 미국에서는 불황으로 1,000만 명의 노동자들이 일자리를 잃었고 미국 기업들은 외국 기업들과의 경쟁에서 수세에 몰리고 있었다. 유럽은 하나의 무역 공동체로 통합됐고 일본은 무적인 것처럼 보였다. 일본 회사들은 로커펠러 센터와 유니버설 스튜디오 같은 미국의 상징들을 사들이고 있었다. (1992년) 대통령 선거에서 당시 아칸소의 주지사였던 빌 클린턴은 자신이 미국을 다시 재궤도에 올려놓을 수 있다고 주장했다. 클린턴은 노동조합의 지지를 끌어냈다. 그리고 글로벌 경쟁으로부터 미국의 노동자들을 보호할 것처럼 보였다.
Again, look at what our competitors do. Meet the competition. Look at what the high-wage countries do. Look at what Germany does. Look at what Japan does. That's what you got to do.
And you'll stand up against the good old boys to do that, huh?
Absolutely.
Good luck to you.
What's the purpose of having a country if you're going to let it go down the drain?
I don't know. Why have we been doing that? You got my vote.
Hey, Governor, don't forget the federal employees too, okay? Thank you.
Yeah, my vote.
Thank you, guys.
하지만 월스트리트의 금융가들을 만난 자리에서 클린턴은 전혀 다른 얘기를 했다. 그 내용은 클린턴 핵심 지지자들의 분노를 살만한 것들이었다. 미국의 금융계는 정부가 재정 지출과 적자를 줄이고 자유무역을 받아들이기를 원했다. 이러한 정책들이 시행되지 않으면 미국 경제는 회복할 수 없다는 것이 그들의 생각이었다. 클린턴은 경험 많은 금융계 중역들을 상대로 자신의 견해와 그들의 견해가 같다는 것을 보여주려 노력했다.
It was a small dinner in New York that I was co-hosting. We had about a dozen people. And my view was that the threshold economic issue for our country was to restore fiscal discipline after a long, long time during which fiscal discipline had eroded.
I could see that Reuben and the others that were there in this rather dark place where we had dinner at night were kind of looking and saying, you know, can this guy from Arkansas be president? What could he possibly know enough about the economy to do it?
After that meeting, I thought to myself that this was a man who cared about what I at least thought we needed to care a great deal about. Now, on the issue of trade, he clearly believed in trade liberalization, and that clearly has been a a dividing line in the Democratic Party was then, is now.
자유무역은 1992년 대선의 이슈였다. 당시 부시 대통령은 미국과 캐나다, 멕시코 사이에 무역과 투자의 제한을 없애는 새로운 협정을 추진하고 있었다. 자유무역 지지자들은 개방된 시장을 통해 부를 창조하고 세계를 하나로 묶으며 더 번영되고 안전한 세상을 건설할 수 있다는 생각을 갖고 있었다. 나프타, 즉 북미 자유무역 협정은 세계화를 정치적 실험대에 올린 첫 사건이었다. 미국에서는 치열한 논쟁이 벌어졌다.
You implement that NAFTA, the Mexican Trade Agreement, where they pay people $1 an hour, have no health care, no retirement, no pollution controls, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and you're going to hear a giant sucking sound of jobs being pulled out of this country.
Ross says, with great conviction, he opposes the North American Free Trade Agreement. I am for the North American Free Trade Agreement. My problem with Governor Clinton, once again, is at one time he's going to make up his mind, he sees some merit in it, but then he sees a lot of things wrong with it. And then the other day he says he's for it, however, then we've got to pass other legislation. When you're President of the United States, you cannot have this pattern of saying, well, I'm for it, but I'm on the other side of it.
I am the one who's in the middle on this. Mr. Perot says it's a bad deal. Mr. Bush says it's a hunky-dory deal. I say, on balance, it does more good than harm if we can get some protection for the environment so that the Mexicans have to follow their own environmental standards, their own labor law standards, and if we have a genuine commitment to re-educate and retrain the American workers who lose their jobs and reinvest in this economy.
대통령에 취임한 이후 클린턴의 경제정책은 금융시장의 신뢰를 회복하는 것에 집중됐다. 그는 첫 번째 임기 내내 재정 적자를 줄이는 데 혼신의 힘을 기울였다. 그러나 무역에 관한 입장은 바뀌었다. 클린턴은 부시가 추진하던 나프타를 적극 지지한다고 발표했다.
Clinton gave a speech in the East Room of the White House that set out how he wanted to discuss NAFTA with the American people. It was really quite a remarkable speech. He talked about NAFTA in a much broader context. He talked about NAFTA in the context of the rapid changes taking place in the global economy, not only from trade, but from technological development, the spread of market-based economics.
This debate about NAFTA is a debate about whether we will embrace these changes and create the jobs of tomorrow, or try to resist these changes, hoping we can preserve the economic structures of yesterday. Nothing we do in this great capital can change the fact that people can move money around in the blink of an eye. I tell you, my fellow Americans, that if we learn anything from the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the governments in Eastern Europe, even a totally controlled society cannot resist the winds of change that economics and technology and information flow have imposed in this world of ours.
일부 지지자들은 나프타에 대한 클린턴의 입장 변화를 배신이라고 생각했다.
The labor movement in the United States opposed NAFTA as it stood because we saw that as a corporate-dominated trade and investment agreement, one that served the interests of multinational corporations, that improved their flexibility, their mobility, their clout. And at the same time, NAFTA did nothing to protect the rights of workers to form unions, to bargain collectively, and to really raise their voices in the political system so that workers could be a formidable countervailing power to multinational corporations. I think Clinton did sell out his traditional blue-collar supporters on the NAFTA issue, and a lot of people haven't forgiven him for that.
Our adversaries tried to make it look like the whole American establishment's on one side and the little guys are on the other. And they could, stir that fear factor. And it was a tough sell. It was a tough sell.
I thought it was one of the most courageous acts of his presidency. We worked with him very hard. The Republicans in the House provided a much bigger percent of the vote than the Democrats did.
하원의 민주당 의원 중 60%는 나프타에 반대 투표를 했다. 공화당 의원들의 지지가 없다면 통과할 수 없는 상황이었다. 나프타가 의회의 비준을 얻자 수천 개의 외국 기업들이 멕시코 북부에 공장을 지어 불과 몇 마일 떨어진 미국에 상품을 수출했다. 멕시코 인구의 40%는 빈곤 속에서 살고 있다. 멕시코가 나프타와 자유무역을 받아들인 것은 당시 개발도상국들이 자유무역에 대해 갖고 있던 시각의 변화를 보여주는 단적인 사례였다. 많은 개발도상 국가들이 개방된 시장이야말로 경제 성장의 열쇠라고 생각하기 시작했다.
I worked 15 years for Coca-Cola. I started as a route salesman. I started right from the bottom. And I learned that discipline, that hard working, that talent is the way to succeed. I always seen globalization as an opportunity. Just the trade agreement with the United States has moved our total trading, which was 6 years ago $40 billion US. Today is $280 billion US in just 6 years. Nobody loses. Everybody can win.
Obviously, trade has increased, investment has increased, and if the only metric you use to measure whether NAFTA has been a success or not is the volume of trade, then NAFTA is tremendously successful. And yet most normal working people, most normal citizens don't watch the volume of trade. Companies have been more aggressive in threatening to move production to Mexico. They've succeeded in bargaining down wages, in opposing unions, and so on a lot of different fronts. We think that NAFTA has shifted the balance of bargaining power in the continent of North America towards multinational corporations.
미국 정부에 따르면 나프타 발효 이후 멕시코와 캐나다 상품의 수입으로 약 40만 개의 미국 내 일자리가 피해를 입었다. 반면 두 나라에 대한 수출로 90만 개의 새로운 일자리가 창출됐다. 1990년대를 거치며 전체적인 국제무역은 거의 2배나 증가했다. 사람들은 보통 무역이란 상품과 재화가 국경을 넘어 움직이는 것이라고 생각한다. 그러나 가장 큰 규모의 무역은 눈에 보이지 않는다. 그것은 돈이다. 주식과 채권 그리고 화폐가 24시간 끊임없이 전 세계를 흘러다닌다. 1990년대 연금 펀드나 뮤추얼 펀드에 가입한 사람은 자신도 모르는 사이 실질적으로 글로벌 금융시장의 투자자가 됐다.
At a dinner, a so-called thinkers' dinner at the White House before one of the State of the Union addresses, and there's this great discussion among all the people around the table about markets, about they out there, that it's somebody different. And finally I raised my hand and said, with all due respect, the markets isn't just them, it's us. It's our aggregated retirement savings, it's our pension plans. That's what the markets are.
캘리포니아주는 미국에서 가장 큰 연금 펀드 중 하나를 운영한다. 캘퍼스라는 이름의 이 펀드는 100만 명이 넘는 주 공무원들의 연금 기금을 관리한다. 수십 년 동안 캘퍼스는 오직 미국 내에서만 투자를 했다. 하지만 세계화의 시대를 맞아 투자의 대상이 변했다. 자산의 4분의 1이 외국에 투자되는 것이다. 풍부한 자금을 가진 연금 펀드는 세계 경제의 활력소가 됐다.
The real source of change in today's world, with the world getting smaller and smaller as we say, and the growth of the global economy as we say, I think it's going to be the providers of capital funds. And that whether anybody likes it or not, increasingly are large pension funds.
I have some of my own personal mutual funds overseas, and they seem to be doing pretty well right now.
And I think in terms of what CalPERS position is, they have a fiduciary responsibility to seek those markets out and to invest and to use that return on that investment to honor their obligations.
We can't keep everything in the United States. You keep things in the United States, it's still not in the United States because so many companies are global, everything is global, everything is interconnected.
냉전이 끝난 후 많은 나라들이 자신들의 자본시장을 처음으로 외국 투자자들에게 개방했다. 캘퍼스와 같은 펀드들은 새로운 기회가 왔다고 생각했다. 그리고 펀드 매니저들을 고용해 제3세계 신흥시장들을 조사하는 임무를 맡겼다.
Okay, very good. Yeah. Let me talk to Dennis, huh? Yeah, but they got an election coming up.
Well, the whole rationale is that these emerging countries grow faster. So what we're trying to do is capture that growth and, of course, make money for our investors. But, of course, the risks are very great because there's no free lunch. So there's a balance. And, of course, it's our job to try to minimize the risks and maximize the returns. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's the objective.
자본이 국경을 자유롭게 넘나들면서 클린턴 정부는 자유무역 협정을 확대해 나갔다. 미국은 개발도상국들에게 더 많은 개방을 권고했다.
I favored a very aggressive policy. I thought that the emerging countries, both emerging economically and those that were new democracies, had a better chance to do well economically and politically if the wealthier countries opened our borders and made trade agreements with them, and if in turn they opened their borders not only to trade but to investment. I thought that economic policy and traditional foreign policy would tend to merge.
This is how it worked. If you go back to the first term, a lot of the international approach of the administration on economic issues was to break down barriers to U.S. firms. We are going to engage our trading partners and encourage, cajole, convince them to bring down their barriers.
외국의 장기 투자가 필요한 개발도상국들 중 많은 나라들이 과거 서양의 식민지였다. 이들 나라엔 규제 없는 자본의 이동이 자신들의 독립을 위협하는 새로운 요소라고 생각하는 사람도 있었다.
Once communism was defeated, then capitalism can expand and show its true self. It's no longer constrained by the need to be nice, so that people will choose the so-called free market system as against the centrally planned system. So because of that, now there is nothing to restrain capital, and capital is demanding that it should be able to go anywhere and do whatever it likes.
1990년대 더 많은 나라들이 시장 경제를 받아들였다. 사람들은 그것을 자본주의의 승리라고 불렀다. 윌 크라이스틀은 과거 경제학 교수 시절 마르크스주의와 자본주의 비교 이론을 가르친 적도 있다. 그러나 현재 캘리포니아주 연금펀드 캘퍼스의 사장인 크라이스틀은 개방된 시장만이 세계의 안정을 가져올 수 있다고 믿고 있다.
This is a kind of revolution. And I think it's going to be one of the most powerful revolutions over time, in my opinion, that will that will move towards giving everyone the franchise of participation in economics. If we don't reach out to these emerging markets, if we don't be evangelists, if you will, and try to encourage them to reform and invest some of our capital funds into these markets, if we don't do that, I'm afraid that some of the predictions that were made a long time ago by Karl Marx and Mr. Engels and others, that there will indeed be a confrontation between the haves and the have-nots that can bring the entire system down.
나프타가 발효되던 바로 그날, 자파티스타 반군이 멕시코 남부에서 봉기했다. 얼마 뒤 유력 대통령 후보가 암살됐다. 정세의 불안을 느낀 외국 투자자들이 멕시코를 탈출하기 시작했다. 글로벌 경제가 새로운 종류의 위기를 경험하는 순간이었다.
Christmas vacation, I was fishing down the British Virgin Islands, and Larry Summers called me, and he said, there's some problems in Mexico I'd like you to know about. And I thought to myself, that it was nice of Larry to call on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm on vacation in Mexico today, there'll be some other country tomorrow, and I don't know why this can't wait till I get back. Well, it turned out that this was not just another country, it was a very, very serious matter.
I was at a restaurant, and they came and said, the Secretary of the Treasury is on the line. And I got on the line, and he said, Greenspan and I have a problem. And we believe if we don't move very decisively, that the Mexican peso will implode. If it implodes, the Mexican government will become very unstable. And we believe you could have a wave of 5 to 9 million people walking north to find jobs.
He understood it very quickly. And I remember his saying, this is the first financial crisis of the 21st century.
And I said to him, this is the first real-time worldwide financial crisis of a kind that will become very normal. And so I said instinctively, I'll back you.
It was fascinating because we had Mexico, which we really did think was facing default, and we had enormous political problems. Accomplishing what we felt we needed to accomplish to support Mexico, to try to prevent this from happening. And we all knew that while we believed the program we were recommending was right, there was some risk it wouldn't work.
So if you go in and say to the president, here's a big crisis that could happen. I mean, we can tell you something to do about it. We can't tell you it's going to work. It's very risky. And we know that it's extremely unpopular, but we think you should do it anyway.
Somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes, I listened to all this. I said, well, this is a no-brainer. We got to do this. If we don't do this, Mexico will certainly fail. Then the borders will be flooded with illegal immigrants who are starving and need food and a job. We'll have an enemy on our southern border, people that will remember when they were down and they were in need, we were not a good neighbor, and we will pay hugely for that. All over the developing world, people who look at us and think that we are smug and rich and unresponsive and don't care about anybody else will have all that confirmed. If we help, at least people will know we tried in a good cause, and it will resonate throughout the developing world.
구제금융 정책은 성공했다. 멕시코는 재빨리 채무를 상환했다. 그러나 멕시코에 대한 개입은 위험한 선례를 남겼다는 비판이 제기됐다. 이 과정에서 스스로 위험을 감수해야 하는 대형 투자자들까지 보호해 주었다는 것이다.
Remember, the people that got bailed out were foreign holders of Mexican government obligations. a sense, we were trying to bail out our own citizens. But it signaled to banks and other rich investors that the U.S. Treasury at that time was going to adopt a bailout policy. People who take risks should bear those risks. They got the reward for them. They should take the downside.
멕시코 위기로 금융시장에 새로운 얼굴이 드러났다. 기술의 발달로 자본이 말 그대로 몇 초 안에 국경을 넘나들 수 있었던 것이다. (1990년대에는) 기술도 국경을 넘기 시작했다. 새로운 상업과 사상들이 그 뒤를 따랐다.
It's hard to believe at the beginning of the 1990s, email was virtually unknown. Most people didn't have it. And a decade later, it was everywhere, and it was just become part of people's lives. And so this communications network was so powerful. The price of telephone calls plummeted. The number of telephone calls around the world skyrocketed. And people are in contact and connected in a way that had never happened before.
미국의 국제전화 통화량은 20년 만에 2억 통에서 52억 통으로 증가했다. 이 전화회사의 통제센터에서만 매일 3억 통의 전화를 처리한다. 미국인이 거는 전화가 자신도 모르는 사이에 개발도상국에 연결되는 일도 많아졌다. 잔액 조회를 위해 신용카드 회사에 전화한 고객이 인도에 위치한 콜센터에 연결된다. 이곳 상담원들은 미국식 이름으로 고객을 만난다.
Good evening, this is Tracy. How may I help you today? Just give me a moment. Right.
인도의 한 외딴 마을. 농부들은 과거에는 경작한 곡물을 시장으로 가져가 판매했다. 하지만 인터넷 덕분에 이제 그들은 곡물을 세계 시장 가격으로 판매할 수 있게 된다. 그 가격은 8,000마일이나 떨어진 시카고 상업거래소에서 결정된 것이다. 이러한 국경 없는 세계는 새로운 종류의 사업가를 만들어냈다. 기업가는 이제 다국적 기업처럼 사고하면서 전 세계를 하나의 시장으로 생각한다. 나라야나 무르티는 가장 먼저 인터넷 혁명의 의미를 이해한 사람 중 하나다.
All of us believed in central planning. All of us believed in socialism because we are all children of a different generation. Then I realized that if you want to eradicate poverty, you don't do it by redistribution of existing wealth. You have to create new wealth.
무르티는 단 $250를 가지고 컴퓨터 소프트웨어 회사를 만드는 데 참여했다. 방갈로에 있는 그의 회사 본부는 이제 마이크로소프트에 이어 세계에서 두 번째로 큰 소프트웨어 연구단지가 됐다. 세계 소프트웨어 엔지니어 중 30%는 인도 출신이다.
You know, I define globalization as producing where it is most cost effective, selling where it is most profitable, sourcing capital from where it is cheapest without worrying about national boundaries.
인력의 이동도 점점 더 쉬워지고 있다. 미국은 이민법을 완화해 엄청난 수의 하이테크 인력을 개발도상국들로부터 끌어들였다.
Silicon Valley is the place, it's the happening place. So many people come here.
This is a place of opportunities. We get a chance to prove ourselves. We get a chance to prove ourselves, to show our skills.
실리콘밸리는 여러 가지 점에서 지구촌의 정신적 중심지였다. 실리콘밸리는 새로운 기술뿐만 아니라 새로운 기업가 정신을 만들어내는 곳이다. 드레이퍼 가족은 1950년대 실리콘밸리에 벤처 자금을 투자한 이래 이곳에서 사업을 계속하고 있다. 1990년대 초 빌 드레이퍼의 아들 팀은 한메일에 투자했다. 그것은 대성공이었다. 그는 세계가 근본적으로 변화하고 있다는 것을 확신했다.
But I don't think I've lost twice. We knew that the internet was going to change the whole way the world worked because we knew that you could do commerce, you could do communication, you could do all these things over the web. And all these governments, India and Africa and Pakistan, China, had all been trapped and they were not really participating in the world economy. They could now. They could because now they could communicate with the rest of the world through this internet. It was a big opportunity. And we saw it and we jumped on it.
I thought I had
Checkmating you again. I think entrepreneurship can happen anywhere. All it takes is someone with a vision and an idea for how to do something better.
세계 인구의 거의 4분의 1이 역사상 처음으로 글로벌 시장에 발을 들여놓고 있다. 중국을 비롯한 많은 개발도상국에서 사람들이 농촌을 떠나기 시작했다. 그들은 공업화된 도시로 몰려갔다. 글로벌 시장을 겨냥해 새로 만들어진 공장에서 일자리를 얻기 위해서다. 세계화의 시대, 역사상 가장 큰 규모의 인구 이동이 벌어지고 있는 것이다. 앞으로 세계 경제 성장의 80%는 도시를 중심으로 이루어질 것으로 예측된다.
原来我高考以后是吧，就落榜以后，人在家里是教书，教了1年书，我这个工资，因为我们是作为民办教师招人去的，是100块钱。那我现在进了保安厂之后，那我的工资已经几乎是翻了，可能原来我家里爸爸妈妈是种田的，现在我把我家里的人全部带这边来了。 我小孩还在这边读书，并且这个很大的变化。
중국 지도자들의 경제 발전 모델은 동남아시아였다. 이들은 무역과 투자를 통해 짧은 시간 안에 놀라운 경제 성장을 이룩해 했다.
When the British came here in 1819, they found a fishing village of about 120 people. No agriculture because the ground was infertile. It's when the empires broke up. Everybody wanted to do their own trading. And we could easily have just withered on the vine. So we just had to make ourselves relevant to the world, and the countries that make themselves relevant become better off. Those who opt out, they suffer.
1970년대 이후 동남아시아 국가들은 세계를 상대로 한 수출국이 됐다. 그들은 자동차에서 컴퓨터에 이르기까지 많은 것들을 전 세계로 실어 날랐다.
And they called it the Asian economic miracle because the world had not really seen that kind of economic growth, that many people brought out of poverty, that rapid a creation of a middle class so quickly anywhere in the history of the world.
1990년대 중반 많은 아시아 국가들이 연 10% 이상의 놀라운 경제 성장을 보이고 있었다.
There was a tremendous confidence and hope that this was the Asian century and the place was being transformed, and you just had to put money there and it would grow on trees.
I remember the CEO of one major company in about 1995 or so saying, if we're not invested tomorrow in Asia, we're too late.
하지만 아시아의 경제 기적에도 예외는 있었다. 세계에서 두 번째로 큰 일본 경제가 예상치 못한 깊은 불황에 빠진 것이다.
10年前以上にバブルの時期というのは非常に国民的にも日本の問題に対しても寛容であったし、一つや二つの問題や赤字国債には非常におおらかに意識を持ってましたけれども。
한때 일본의 경제 성장은 계속될 것만 같았다. 하지만 일본은 세계화를 향한 급속한 변화의 움직임에 기민하게 적응하지 못했다.
Japan is a very sort of parochial and barely closed economy. There's no question about that. It's a barely closed society. Walk around the Japanese cities, you don't see many foreigners.
수출대국 일본은 자신들의 국내 산업에 대해서는 철저한 보호 정책을 가지고 있었다. 일본의 경제 문제는 이런 모순에서 비롯된 것이다.
One sector of the Japanese economy, export-oriented sort of sector, which is highly competitive, consisting of Toyotas and Sonys. And the other is a domestic manufacturing and domestic service industry, and which is extremely uncompetitive. No, we have a market-oriented capitalistic system on the one hand. We have a very socialistic, egalitarian sort of sector on the other hand.
일본 경제는 오랫동안 정부 관료들에 의해 극도로 규제됐다. 나이토 마사히사가 변화를 시도했을 때 관료들은 매우 회의적인 태도를 보였다.
けれどもそれの背景というのは後で変更されるような違った経済ルールの下での繁栄であるという経済を全体として動かすフレームワークの違いというものにいう中でのバブルのないという中で金融面での緩和をやる。
나이토는 예고도 없이 해고당했다. 일본은 옛 방식을 고수했고 경제 불황은 계속됐다. 아시아의 경제 기적이 처음으로 문제에 직면한 것이다. (1997년) 초 급속히 성장하던 동남아시아의 경제는 과열되고 있었다. 1990년대 태국은 자신들의 자본시장을 개방했다. 태국 기업들은 처음으로 국내 은행보다 낮은 이율을 적용하는 외국 은행들로부터 돈을 빌릴 수 있었다.
People would come and knock on your door and plead with you to borrow money, be they European banks or Japanese banks. They came and begged us to borrow from them.
자본시장 개방 4년 만에 태국 기업들이 외국은행에서 빌린 돈은 2천억 달러를 넘어섰다. 미국과 유럽의 정부들은 아시아 국가들로 돈이 유입되는 것을 장려했다.
Oh yeah, we were strong advocates of opening up capital markets and the benefits that could flow therefrom. But we were also strong advocates at the same time, because we recognized the tie of developing the banking systems, developing the capital markets, and developing regulatory systems, none of which is easy.
And there was an underlying flaw in the system that people really didn't focus very much on, which was the institutional weakness. What that meant is that the banking systems were not well developed, the securities laws were not well developed, they had not kept up with the development of these economies and their integration into the world economy.
태국의 중앙은행은 그들의 통화 가치를 인위적으로 높게 유지했다. 그것은 투기 버블을 더욱 키우는 결과를 가져왔다. 금융위기 국가들의 최후의 의지 수단인 IMF, 즉 국제통화기금은 태국이 붕괴의 길을 가고 있다고 걱정하기 시작했다.
I went to Bangkok in May 1997. It was full of cranes everywhere, and it looked like the boom would never end. But there were very weak banks who were lending against the security of those buildings which were never going to be filled.
태국의 통화 바트는 달러에 연동돼 있었다. 태국 경제가 약화되면서 국제금융시장은 바트의 달러 연동 정책이 지속될 수 없음을 알아차렸다.
Thailand had fixed the value of its currency in terms of dollars. It had a fixed exchange rate, and as people began to wonder, well, do they actually have enough dollars to always be able to give me dollars in exchange for the baht, the Thai currency I have? And when they begin to wonder about that, they start asking for the dollars.
The central bank kept on saying, no, we will support the currency at this fixed rate. And of course, they were shelling out the US dollars to protect the currency. So their foreign reserves were dwindling. And of course, any hedge fund manager looking at that would say, hey, these guys are going to be in trouble, and I'm going to short the Thai baht.
바트화는 무자비한 시장의 압력 아래 놓이게 됐다. 1997년 7월 태국 정부는 결국 바트화를 평가절하할 수밖에 없었다. 거품은 터졌다. 아시아의 금융위기가 막 시작된 것이다. 경제 충격은 태국 사회 전체로 퍼져나갔다.
ก็อย่างแฟนนี่ก็โดนตัดเงินเดือนนะคะแต่ตัวเองก็เงินเดือนก็คงที่แล้วขึ้นมานิดๆหน่อยๆขึ้นไม่เยอะเหมือนแต่ก่อนนะคะเพราะว่าเศรษฐกิจไม่ดีเพิ่งจะมาดีก็ประมาณ2 ปีให้หลัง2 ปี 3 ปีให้หลังแต่แฟนโดนตัดค่าครองชีพขึ้นทุกอย่างค่าน้ำค่าไฟผมก็ฟ้องอะไรก็ขึ้นหมดแต่ว่าเงินเดือนนี้ก็ขึ้นไม่เยอะเนี่ยเพราะเศรษฐกิจ
경제가 사실상 붕괴 상황에 이르자 태국은 IMF로부터 긴급 구제 차관을 받았다. 그것이 효과가 없자 태국 정부는 워싱턴에 도움을 요청했다. 누구도 태국같이 작은 나라의 경제가 세계적 위기를 가져오리라고는 상상하지 못했다.
Thailand is a very small economy. It doesn't have a lot of links, and it's not exactly in your backyard. In any event, the U.S. chose not to intervene in Thailand, thinking it was not going to spill over. Why would it? The contagion effects were not apparent to anybody, not just the administration.
I think they misjudged the situation. And probably because it was seen too much as a financial issue rather than an overall strategic issue.
금융 자본가들은 태국뿐만 아니라 다른 아시아 국가들에도 아직 드러나지 않은 문제가 있을 수 있다고 걱정했다. 더는 아시아 전역에서 빠져나가고 있었다. 사람들은 이것을 금융 전염병이라 불렀다.
And at each stage, the crisis turned out to have a virulence, which became known as contagion, much greater than it had been anticipated. And what that really reflected was indeed globalization, was the way these economies had become locked together, and investors looked at emerging markets. They said there's a problem in Thailand, well then there's a problem in these other countries. And so each step of the crisis created these shock waves that carried on into the next.
전염병은 이웃 국가들로 번졌다. 안정적인 경제를 가지고 있는 것처럼 보였던 말레이시아도 갑자기 글로벌 시장으로부터 무자비한 압력을 받기 시작했다.
We have the currency going down and down and down, and we have the stock market doing the same. And we felt totally helpless. We feel that there is no way we can recover. So, I mean, the feeling is really very bad, very frightening.
전염병이 다음으로 옮겨간 곳은 이 지역에서 가장 인구가 많은 인도네시아였다. 인도네시아 정부는 무너졌고 도시는 혼란에 빠졌다.
The fund managers didn't know the difference between Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore. They just say, I want out. Property prices collapse, companies collapse. And in the case of Indonesia, the social fabric collapsed. Churches have been burned, mosques have been attacked. They have killed each other. And it's all the fallout of an economic collapse.
이것은 IMF도 처음 겪는 전혀 새로운 종류의 금융위기였다. IMF는 인도네시아와 다른 아시아 국가들에게 제공할 막대한 차관을 조성했다. 조건은 이들 나라들이 정부 지출을 줄이고 금리를 높이며 부패를 척결하는 것이었다.
You are the doctor going in to deal with a very sick patient. The public blames the doctor for the fact that the patient is sick, but the patient was sick to begin with. But these things are societally wrenching. And there are huge vested interests. And you wouldn't get into these crises if the vested interests weren't that important. That, I think, is one of the reasons why it takes political change to deal with a crisis as big as this.
아시아의 일부 지도자들은 IMF가 일종의 신식민주의적 조건을 내세웠다고 생각했다.
Presently, we see a well-planned effort to undermine the economies of all the ASEAN countries by destabilizing their currencies.
In the old days, you need to conquer a country with military force, and then you can control that country. Today, it is not necessary at all. You can destabilize a country, make it poor, and then make it request for help. And for the help that is given, you gain control over the policies of a country. And when you gain control over the policies of a country, effectively, you have colonized that country.
시장의 힘은 IMF나 어떤 하나의 정부가 제어하기엔 너무나 컸다. 1997년 말 세계에서 경제적으로 가장 성공한 나라 중 하나인 한국까지 전염병에 감염됐다.
It was unbelievable that the crisis has spread as quickly as to Indonesia and Korea within a matter of 6 months or 7 months. But the world was much more globalized than we thought it was at that time.
In the last week of December of 1997, the 11th largest economy in the world, which was Korea, had, roughly speaking, 4 billion of reserves left and was using reserves at the rate of $1 billion a day. Well, it didn't take a great deal of quantitative insight to see that that was not a long-term viable situation.
12월 27일 날 김대중 정예고 고용관
한국은 세계를 속이고 있었다. 자신들에게 위기를 견딜 만큼의 충분한 돈이 있다고 주장했다. IMF의 스탠리 피셔가 한국은행의 외환 보유고를 조사하기 위해 서울에 도착했다.
I visited Korea a couple of days before they turned to the IMF for help. And there was a state of panic. And it was at that point that I went to the central bank and was shown how much money was left in the Korean central bank. It was essentially all gone.
한국은 일본과 유럽은행에서 빌린 외채에 대해 채무 불이행을 선언하기 직전 상황까지 갔다. 일본과 유럽은행들은 자기 정부의 압력에 따라 결국 한국에 대한 대출 만기 연장에 동의했다. 한국은 역사상 가장 큰 규모의 긴급 구제금융을 받게 됐다.
Liberty Bell.